The morning sunlight streamed through the tall, narrow windows of the convent, casting gentle patterns across the worn wooden floors. The air was calm, filled with the faint scent of old books and polished furniture. She moved slowly, yet with a quiet grace, her steps steady and deliberate. Every morning followed the same rhythm. A soft prayer, a simple breakfast, and the hushed moments of reflection that filled the early hours with peace. Yet within her heart, there was a melody, a quiet longing that had been a part of her for as long as she could remember. Music had always been her companion. Long before she entered the convent, she had discovered the piano in her childhood home. The instrument was old and slightly out of tune, but it sang with a warmth that no other sound could match. She would sit for hours, her small fingers dancing over the keys, creating songs that seemed to lift her spirit higher than any other pleasure could. Even as a child, she knew that music was more than a hobby. It was a voice that spoke the truths her words could not. Life in the convent was simple, disciplined, and at times demanding. The days were filled with chores, prayers, and quiet service. There was little time for leisure, and indulgence in personal desires was discouraged. Still, the piano remained her secret joy. The convent had an old, upright piano tucked away in a sunlit corner of the main hall. Its wood was scratched, its keys yellowed with age, but when she played, it sang as clearly as the one from her childhood. She would often sneak away after morning duties, pressing her hands to the keys, letting the music flow, and feeling the years melt away with every note. Her fellow nuns admired her quietly. They respected her dedication and her humility, yet few knew the depth of her talent. Music was her private conversation with the world, a world she had chosen to leave behind in order to devote herself fully to her faith. The convent provided her with a life of purpose, yet it also placed limits on her expression. She understood this and accepted it with a patient heart, though it did not lessen the yearning that lived within her. Each day, she would watch the younger novices practicing their chores, learning the routines that would sustain them for years to come. They moved with energy and curiosity, their laughter filling the hallways in contrast to the quiet rhythm of her own life. She remembered her own youth in their faces and felt a gentle pang of nostalgia. The world outside was changing rapidly, and yet within the convent walls, time seemed to slow. It was a place of refuge, of reflection, but also of quiet longing. Sometimes, when the day's work was done, she would sit by the window and gaze at the gardens. The flowers bloomed with colors that seemed almost too bright. The birds sang songs that were free and unrestrained, and the wind carried scents of distant lands she would never see. Music was her bridge to these things. When she played, she imagined herself in those gardens, walking among the flowers, listening to the songs of the birds, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin. Every note she struck was a memory, a dream, a fragment of a life that had been lived fully in the heart, even if it remained quiet in the world. The convent had been her home for decades. She had entered as a young woman, drawn by a calling she could not ignore, a sense of purpose that overshadowed her personal desires. She had given up family, friendships, and the chance for a different kind of life. Yet she had never given up music. It remained a thread connecting her past and present, a reminder of who she was beyond her vows and responsibilities. Her talent had been acknowledged quietly by those who had heard her, but it was never showcased. She had never performed publicly, and she had never sought attention or praise. The music was hers and hers alone, a sacred part of her inner life. Her love for the piano went beyond mere notes and melodies. It was a form of prayer, a way to express gratitude, sorrow, joy, and hope. When she played, her hands seemed to move with a life of their own, translating the deepest emotions into sound. She could play a piece that would bring tears to the eyes of anyone who listened, yet she played mostly in solitude. The convent's strict routines and her own humility kept her hidden from the world, and she accepted that, finding contentment in the quiet moments when she could let the music breathe. But even in her contentment, there was a flicker of something more. She longed to share her music, to let others feel the same emotions she had felt while playing. It was a small, persistent dream, one that she whispered to herself in the silence of the early morning. Could music touch hearts outside the convent as it did within? Could she reach people she had never met, inspire them, or bring them comfort? These thoughts were fleeting and cautious, yet they lingered like the soft echo of a chord that refuses to fade. One morning, after the first prayers were complete, she approached the piano with a mixture of reverence and anticipation. The room was empty, save for the sun filtering through the windows. She placed her fingers on the keys and let a familiar peace flow from her hands. The notes were gentle at first, cautious, like a bird testing its wings. Then, slowly, they grew bolder, filling the room with a warmth and depth that only years of practice could create. She closed her eyes and let the music take her, feeling her soul stretch and expand with each chord. In those moments, the convent faded away, and she was not merely a nun, not merely a keeper of rules and routines, but a woman alive in every sense, expressing herself fully and without restraint. Her music had a way of telling stories without words. Every note carried a memory, a dream, a hope. She played for the girl she once was, for the friends she had left behind, for the countless hours she had spent in solitude. She played for the moments of joy and sorrow, for the quiet victories and the unseen struggles. The piano became an extension of her spirit, each melody a reflection of her inner life. When she finished, she sat in silence for a long time, letting the echoes linger, feeling the connection between her heart and the world. Though she kept her music private, there was a subtle influence on those around her. The other nuns noticed the way her presence seemed to calm the air, how the atmosphere of the convent felt warmer, more harmonious, after she had played. Even without hearing her, they could sense the serenity she carried, a result of the music that filled her own heart. She did not need recognition. The impact was quiet but real. Music had taught her patience, compassion, and the power of silent influence. As the day progressed, she went about her duties with the same quiet diligence as always. She prepared meals, tended to the gardens, and assisted the other nuns in their work. Yet the memory of the morning's music stayed with her, a gentle reminder of her inner life and the unspoken dreams that still fluttered within. She knew that one day circumstances might change. Perhaps there would be an opportunity to share her music beyond the convent walls. Perhaps not. But for now, she cherished the moments she had, finding joy in the act itself, in the simple pleasure of the piano beneath her fingers and the songs that rose from her soul. Evening came, and with it a quiet reflection. She knelt in the chapel, offering prayers of gratitude for the life she had been given, for the music that sustained her, and for the unseen ways she had touched others. Her voice was soft, her words sincere, yet within her heart, there was a melody that needed no words, a song that carried her hopes and memories. She rose slowly, feeling a sense of calm satisfaction. The day had been ordinary, yet extraordinary in the small, precious ways that mattered most to her. As she retired to her small room, she lingered for a moment by the window, looking at the fading light and the shadows that stretched across the convent walls. She allowed herself a gentle smile, thinking of the music that had filled the day. Tomorrow would bring more prayers, more work, more quiet routines. But tomorrow, too, would hold the promise of the piano, of music, of the unspoken dreams that kept her spirit alive. She lay down, resting her hands as if they had just played their last note, yet knowing that the song within her would never end. And in the stillness of the night, with only the moonlight for company, she dreamed of the day her music would find its way beyond the convent, touching hearts in ways she had only imagined. The day had barely begun when the nun heard the news. It was not the kind of news that could be ignored or brushed aside. A local festival was approaching, one where people from nearby towns would gather to celebrate art, music, and culture. For years, the convent had been invited to send a representative, but the rules were strict. No individual performances were allowed. The thought of playing in public, even just once, had always been a quiet hope in her heart. Yet now she was told clearly that she would not be permitted to participate. The words struck her like a sudden gust of cold wind, filling her with disappointment and a strange, aching emptiness. She sat quietly in the common room, her hands folded in her lap, trying to absorb the reality. Others around her continued with their morning routines, unaware of the storm inside her. She felt a pang of frustration, not against anyone in particular, but against the limits that life sometimes imposed. It was not the first time she had been asked to restrain her passions, but this time it hurt more deeply. The piano, which had always been a source of comfort, suddenly seemed far away, a distant friend she could not reach. Her thoughts drifted back to the days when she had first discovered her love for music. She remembered the small, cramped living room in her childhood home, the piano that had called to her like an old friend, and the hours she had spent learning, experimenting, and dreaming. Those memories now felt both comforting and cruel, reminding her of the freedom she once had, freedom that now seemed constrained by rules, age, and circumstance. She felt the weight of years pressing on her, the accumulated sense of duty and obedience that had defined her life. She tried to focus on her daily tasks, tending the garden, preparing meals, and assisting others in the convent. But each time she passed the old piano in the sunlit hall, a pang of longing tugged at her heart. She would stop briefly, place her hand on the keys, and imagine the notes rising in a melody that no one would hear. The music was alive in her mind, vibrant and full, yet trapped behind an invisible barrier. She wondered if anyone would ever understand the depth of her passion, the way music had shaped her very being. The other nuns noticed her quiet sadness but did not pry. They respected her space, understanding that certain feelings were deeply personal. Still, a few of them exchanged worried glances, sensing that something important was being denied. The nun herself struggled with a mix of emotions: resignation, patience, and a spark of rebellion that she barely admitted to herself. It was not disobedience she desired, only the chance to share a gift that had been nurtured for decades. She feared that asking openly would be seen as selfish or inappropriate, yet the yearning in her heart refused to be silenced. In the days that followed, she found herself visiting the piano more often, lingering longer than usual. She would place her hands on the keys and let them hover there, feeling the texture, the coldness of the ivory, the slight unevenness of some keys. Her imagination transformed the silent room into a grand concert hall, filled with people who could feel every note, every emotion that poured from her heart. She played softly at first, cautious, almost hesitant, as if testing the boundaries of reality and dreams. The music swelled within her, echoing through the empty hall, filling spaces that had long been silent. Her secret moments of music became a lifeline. They were brief, stolen snippets of time that brought joy and release. She began to plan, quietly and carefully, imagining a way she could participate in the festival despite the rules. She thought about the possibilities, the risks, and the consequences, weighing each carefully. Her mind returned to the idea of sharing her music, not for recognition, but for the simple act of connection. Music was a universal language, and she longed to speak it, even if only for a few precious minutes. Meanwhile, news of the festival spread throughout the local community. People were excited, discussing the performances, the artists, and the special guests. The nun listened from a distance, her heart tightening with a mix of excitement and sadness. She knew that her presence would be impossible under the current rules, yet the idea of being part of something larger, of touching lives beyond the convent walls, was intoxicating. She felt both the pull of her dreams and the weight of the limitations imposed upon her. One afternoon, a visitor arrived at the convent, someone who had heard whispers of her talent. The visitor, a kind and gentle person, approached cautiously, expressing admiration for her music and curiosity about her experience with the piano. The nun felt a flicker of hope, wondering if this chance encounter could lead to something more. They spoke quietly in the sunlit hall, discussing music, memory, and the power of art to heal and inspire. The visitor listened with genuine interest, and for the first time in years, the nun felt that someone outside the convent understood her inner world. As days passed, she continued to practice, her fingers growing more confident, her melodies richer. She experimented with pieces she had never played publicly, letting her imagination guide her. The piano became both a refuge and a stage, a place where she could dream freely, even if reality constrained her. Her emotions poured into every note: hope, longing, joy, and the bittersweet ache of dreams deferred. Each session was a reminder of what she had to offer the world, a gift that could not be denied, even if it had to remain private for now. Despite the obstacles, she did not lose faith in the possibility of sharing her music. She understood the importance of patience, the value of timing, and the delicate balance between duty and desire. The convent had taught her discipline, humility, and devotion, but it had not extinguished the fire of creativity that lived within her. That fire burned quietly, steadily, refusing to be ignored. It was a constant reminder that even in the face of barriers, the human spirit could find ways to express itself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she sat at the piano once more. The room was bathed in a soft golden light, and for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine the festival, the audience, the sound of applause. She played with abandon, each note carrying her hopes and dreams, her fears and her courage. The music filled the room, wrapping around her like a comforting embrace, reminding her that even if she could not perform publicly, she could still create, still touch hearts, still dream. Her secret sessions became a ritual, a sacred time where the boundaries of reality softened, and the possibilities seemed endless. She practiced with intention, pouring herself into each piece, refining her skill, and deepening her understanding of the music she loved. She experimented with expression, timing, and emotion, finding new ways to convey the stories that lived within her. The piano became more than an instrument. It was a companion, a confidant, a bridge to a world that had been kept just out of reach. Yet, even with the solace of her music, the disappointment of being prevented from performing lingered. She wrestled with feelings of frustration and longing, trying to reconcile her obedience with her desire. She questioned whether she would ever have the chance to share her gift, whether the world would ever hear the melodies that had been nurtured in silence for so many years. Her heart ached with the tension between patience and hope, between acceptance and the quiet urge to take a risk. The festival drew nearer, and with it a renewed determination. She began to explore every possibility, considering ways to participate within the boundaries of her circumstances. She sought advice quietly from those she trusted, weighing options carefully, and imagining scenarios where her music could reach others without causing conflict. Each idea was tested in her mind, each potential path considered with care and thoughtfulness. Her imagination became a laboratory, a place where creativity and strategy merged, guiding her toward a solution that might one day allow her to play freely. Through it all, she remained humble, grounded in her daily routines and responsibilities. She understood the value of balance, the importance of serving others, and the beauty of small, meaningful moments. Yet her inner life, rich with music and imagination, continued to flourish. The piano was a constant companion, a source of strength and inspiration, reminding her that even in the face of obstacles, she had the power to create, to dream, and to touch the world in ways that transcended rules and expectations. As the sun set on the eve of the festival, she played one last piece, a gentle melody that captured the essence of her journey. It was a song of patience, hope, and quiet resilience, a reflection of the life she had led and the dreams she still carried. She allowed herself a moment of reflection, acknowledging both the challenges and the joys, the sacrifices and the rewards. The music resonated within her, a reminder that even when prevented from acting openly, the spirit could soar, the heart could sing, and the soul could remain free. The night was calm, the convent asleep, and she lay in her small room, her mind alive with possibilities. She dreamed of the future, of the moment when she might finally play in front of others, of the way her music could inspire and move those who heard it. She knew the path would not be easy, that there would be obstacles and limitations, but she also knew that determination, patience, and a deep love for her art could overcome even the most stubborn barriers. And so, with hope and quiet resolve, she drifted into sleep, the melodies of her heart guiding her dreams and preparing her for the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. The morning of the festival arrived, bringing with it a mixture of excitement and quiet tension. Outside the convent walls, the town was alive with preparations. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, vendors arranged their goods, and the distant sound of rehearsals drifted through the air. Inside, the nun felt a flutter in her chest, a mixture of longing and anxiety. She had spent countless hours practicing, imagining this day, yet now that it had arrived, the reality seemed overwhelming. The rules still forbade her from performing, but something within her stirred, a quiet insistence that this moment might not pass unnoticed. She moved through her morning routine as usual, preparing the meals, checking the gardens, and assisting the other nuns. Her hands shook slightly, not from age or fatigue, but from anticipation. The piano in the sunlit hall seemed to call to her more urgently than ever, as if it knew the opportunity was near. She paused for a moment, placing her hand on the keys, feeling the familiar coldness and the comforting resistance of the instrument beneath her fingers. The music inside her seemed to grow louder, urging her to act, to seize a chance she had long imagined. A visitor, the same kind person who had shown interest in her music before, arrived unexpectedly. They spoke quietly, carefully, offering encouragement without pressure. They had heard whispers of her talent and insisted that the world should experience it, even if only briefly. Their presence was a spark, a gentle push that ignited a courage she had only felt in private. She listened, absorbing the words, feeling the warmth of understanding and support. For the first time, she considered the possibility that rules could bend, that small risks could lead to profound moments. She approached the piano, her heart pounding, her mind filled with a mix of doubt and determination. She hesitated, wondering if it was right to play despite the restrictions. But the visitor's gentle encouragement reminded her that sometimes courage was about more than defiance. It was about sharing a gift that could inspire, comfort, or heal. With a deep breath, she settled onto the piano bench, her hands hovering over the keys. The room was still, the sunlight spilling across the worn wood and yellowed keys, and for a moment, it felt as if the world itself was holding its breath. The first notes were tentative, soft, almost shy. She played slowly at first, testing the space, the audience that existed only in her imagination. The melody began to unfold, each note carrying years of practice, patience, and unspoken emotion. Her fingers moved with surprising agility, striking chords with precision and feeling. The music grew bolder, flowing with confidence, and the room seemed to fill with a warmth and energy that had been absent for decades. She closed her eyes, letting the sound guide her, letting the music speak the words her voice never could. As she played, the visitor's eyes glistened with tears, the emotions stirred by the performance impossible to conceal. The notes echoed through the hall, filling every corner, brushing against the walls and reaching into the hearts of anyone who might hear. In that moment, the piano was more than an instrument. It was an extension of her soul, a vessel through which her dreams, memories, and deepest feelings could flow freely. She played with abandon, her heart soaring with every note, feeling the freedom of expression she had long been denied. The nun's performance began to attract attention. Other nuns, drawn by the sound, entered quietly, their footsteps hushed against the floor. They watched in awe as she played, sensing the depth of her talent and the intensity of her emotion. It was a side of her they had rarely witnessed, a glimpse of the vibrant spirit that lived beneath the surface of her calm, disciplined exterior. Some could not hold back tears, moved by the sheer beauty and sincerity of her music. Others simply stood in silence, absorbing the moment, understanding without words the courage and passion it took to play. Word of her performance began to spread beyond the convent. A few visitors who had been invited to the festival and had wandered near the convent walls paused, curious about the source of the beautiful music. They peeked through the windows, captivated by the sight of the elderly nun playing with such skill and emotion. Cameras and phones were absent. This moment was unplanned, spontaneous, and pure. The music itself was the messenger, transcending barriers of age, rules, and expectation. She continued to play, each piece more expressive than the last. Her repertoire included familiar melodies from her youth, pieces she had learned in secret, and compositions that seemed to emerge directly from her heart. The variety and depth of her performance were astonishing, a testament to decades of dedication and love for music. She lost herself in the flow of the melodies, unaware of time, of restrictions, of anything beyond the sound and the feeling it created. It was a communion between her soul and the piano, a private miracle that had now become a shared experience. The visitor who had encouraged her remained close, whispering words of support and admiration. Their presence reminded her that she was not alone, that her music could reach beyond the walls she had known for so long. The audience, both inside and outside the convent, felt the power of the moment. They sensed the courage it took to perform, the vulnerability and honesty in every note. It was more than a performance. It was a declaration, a quiet triumph over the constraints that had long shadowed her life. At one point, she paused, letting her hands rest on the keys. The silence that followed was almost as powerful as the music itself. The room was charged with emotion, every listener holding their breath, feeling the lingering resonance of her talent and spirit. She looked up briefly, meeting the eyes of those around her, and felt a sense of connection, a bridge between her private world and the hearts of others. She realized that this moment, fleeting as it was, had changed something fundamental, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed it. Encouraged by the reception, she began to experiment, letting her imagination guide the performance. She improvised passages, blending classical techniques with the melodies that had lived in her mind for decades. The music became a living, breathing entity, responding to her emotions and the subtle reactions of her audience. It was dynamic, unpredictable, and deeply human. She felt alive in a way she had not experienced in years, and the joy of creation filled her completely. Her performance continued for what felt like hours, though in reality it was only a brief window of time. Each piece told a story of love, loss, hope, and perseverance. Each chord was a reflection of a life dedicated to service, tempered by the quiet rebellion of pursuing one's passion in secret. The audience, whether nuns, visitors, or passers-by, felt the authenticity and power of her expression. Some were moved to tears, others to laughter, and many simply sat in awe, silent witnesses to something extraordinary. As the final notes lingered in the air, she allowed herself a deep exhale, a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and quiet triumph. She had done it. Against the odds, against the rules, and despite her age, she had shared her gift. The music had touched others, just as it had always touched her own heart. She looked around, seeing faces glistening with emotion, and felt a profound sense of connection. For a brief moment, the barriers of convention, age, and expectation seemed to vanish, leaving only the shared experience of music and humanity. In the aftermath, there was no need for words. The impact was immediate, palpable, and undeniable. Those present understood that they had witnessed something rare and precious. The nun herself felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, her hands tingling from the effort and the emotion of performance. She had stepped beyond her comfort zone, embraced her courage, and allowed the world to experience a part of her that had long remained hidden. The visitor approached once more, offering congratulations and heartfelt admiration. They spoke of the lives that had been touched, the inspiration that would ripple outward, and the example of courage and authenticity she had provided. She smiled quietly, feeling the warmth of validation without seeking it, understanding that the true reward had been the act itself. The music shared, the barriers transcended, the heart expressed. As evening fell and the sun dipped below the horizon, the nun returned to her quiet life within the convent. She carried with her the memory of the performance, a vivid reminder of what was possible when courage met opportunity. The rules and routines of daily life would continue, but now there was a new light within her, a knowledge that her music could reach beyond walls, beyond expectations, beyond limitations. She had played, she had shared, and she had stunned the world, not with fame or accolades, but with the undeniable power of her talent and spirit. That night, she reflected on the day, on the courage it took to act, and on the beauty of sharing one's gifts. She understood that life was full of obstacles, that rules and circumstances could limit expression, but that the human heart and spirit were capable of extraordinary feats when nurtured by passion and determination. The music lingered in her mind, a constant companion, a reminder of her own strength and the potential within every quiet, patient heart. And as she lay down to rest, the echoes of the piano still humming in her ears, she felt a deep sense of peace. The day had been transformative, not because of recognition, applause, or attention, but because of the act of embracing her own voice, of trusting her instincts, and of allowing herself to be fully alive. The world had heard her music, and in that moment, she knew that the years of quiet practice, patience, and devotion had all led to this extraordinary, unforgettable day. The moment her final note lingered in the air, a hushed silence filled the room. It was a silence charged with awe, admiration, and the deep understanding that something extraordinary had just occurred. The nun slowly lifted her hands from the piano, feeling the gentle ache of exertion, but also the warm glow of accomplishment that radiated through her entire being. She looked around at the faces before her. Some teary, some smiling, all transformed by the music they had just heard. She realized that, for the first time in many years, her music had crossed boundaries, touched hearts, and resonated far beyond the quiet walls of the convent. The other nuns, who had stood at the edges of the room, whispered among themselves, struggling to find words to express the depth of what they had witnessed. They had known of her talent in passing, but to see it expressed so fully, so openly, was a revelation. Some felt pride, others surprise, and all felt the undeniable power of a spirit that refused to be confined. It was a reminder that talent, courage, and dedication could flourish even in the most restrictive environments, and that the heart's voice, when finally unleashed, could move mountains. Outside the convent, the visitor who had encouraged her performance shared the story quietly, speaking to those in the nearby town who were preparing for the festival. Word spread slowly at first, then more rapidly, as people from all corners of the community began to hear about the elderly nun, whose music had stunned everyone who had been fortunate enough to witness it. Messages of admiration, awe, and gratitude began to reach the convent, sent by strangers whose hearts had been touched by the melodies that had drifted beyond the windows. The nun herself received the news with humility, more focused on the act of playing than on the recognition it brought. She felt gratitude, yes, but it was the knowledge that her music had made a difference that warmed her heart most. As days passed, the impact of her performance became more evident. Children who had heard the story spoke excitedly about the magical music played by the kind elderly nun, dreaming of meeting her one day. Local musicians, inspired by her skill and bravery, began to consider how they could incorporate passion and authenticity into their own performances. Even the nuns within the convent noticed subtle changes. A new energy in their routines, a softening of strict boundaries, and a growing appreciation for the talents each person carried within them. The nun watched quietly, a gentle smile on her face, understanding that her small act of courage had rippled outward, touching lives in ways she had not fully imagined. The festival itself arrived, and the community gathered to celebrate art and music, unaware that the most remarkable performance had already taken place in the convent halls. Yet the memory of her music lingered, carried in the hearts of those who had heard it. Visitors spoke of it in hushed tones, as if sharing a secret treasure, and the story grew into a legend of its own. A tale of an elderly nun who, against all expectations and restrictions, had played with a passion and skill that left everyone in awe. Within the convent, she continued her daily routines, but now there was a subtle lightness in her step. The music had given her a sense of liberation, a feeling that her spirit had been seen and appreciated beyond the boundaries she had known for so long. She returned to the piano often, though now her practice sessions were different. They were no longer solely for herself. She played with an awareness that her music had power, that it could move others, and that every note carried a responsibility as well as a gift. She experimented with new pieces, blending styles, exploring melodies that had long lived in her imagination. The piano became a place of inspiration, reflection, and continued growth. Visitors began to seek her out more frequently, drawn by stories of the extraordinary performance. They came with curiosity, reverence, and sometimes tears in their eyes, eager to hear the music that had captivated so many. She welcomed them quietly, offering performances without fanfare or expectation, maintaining the humility that had always defined her character. The room would fill with music, and for each visitor, it was a personal experience, a moment of connection that transcended age, status, or background. The nun found joy in these interactions, not from praise, but from knowing that her music had the power to comfort, inspire, and heal. The impact extended beyond mere admiration. Local artists began to see her as a symbol of courage and authenticity, someone who had followed her heart despite obstacles and societal expectations. Her example encouraged others to pursue their passions, to express themselves fully, and to recognize that age or circumstance need not limit creativity. Letters and messages arrived from faraway towns, each recounting how her story had inspired someone to pick up an instrument, to try a new form of expression, or simply to believe in the value of their own talents. She received these messages quietly, smiling and reflecting on the interconnectedness of lives, music, and dreams. The convent itself slowly began to adapt. Leaders and nuns alike noticed the joy and inspiration that had flowed from the performance, and they began to consider ways to support creative expression within their walls. Music became a more prominent part of daily life, with moments set aside for playing, practicing, and sharing melodies. The nun's example demonstrated that rules need not be barriers to growth, and that nurturing talent could enrich the community as a whole. She observed these changes with gentle satisfaction, understanding that her courage had not only allowed her to express herself, but had also opened doors for others. Throughout this time, she remained humble, never seeking fame or recognition. Her joy came from the act of creating, the connections forged through music, and the simple satisfaction of knowing that her heart had been heard. She continued her routines with the same dedication and care, yet now there was an added depth to her movements, a lightness born from fulfillment. Each step, each task, was imbued with the quiet knowledge that she had made a difference, that the music she had nurtured for decades had reached beyond herself, touching lives in ways she had long dreamed of. Her impact was not limited to music alone. People who heard her story began to reflect on the value of persistence, courage, and following one's passion despite obstacles. The narrative of the elderly nun became a symbol of hope and inspiration, a reminder that the human spirit could triumph in subtle yet profound ways. Parents spoke to their children about her example, encouraging them to pursue their dreams. Teachers shared her story in classrooms, illustrating the power of dedication and authenticity. Her quiet act of bravery had created ripples far beyond the room where the piano once sang. Even as recognition spread, she remained grounded. She understood the importance of balance, of humility, and of maintaining her life's core purpose. The music was a gift, not a tool for ego or fame, and she approached it with reverence and care. She continued to assist the nuns, tend the gardens, and engage in daily routines, but now with a renewed sense of purpose and vitality. The joy of sharing her music had infused her life with new energy, strengthening her commitment to service and community. In private moments, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the quiet years of practice, through the disappointment of restrictions, to the courage that led her to play publicly. Every step had been a lesson in patience, resilience, and the power of following one's heart. She recognized that challenges were part of life, but they could be transformed into opportunities for growth, expression, and connection. Her music had become a living testament to these truths, a narrative told not in words, but in sound and emotion. As the days turned into weeks, the legacy of her performance continued to unfold. Visitors kept arriving, messages of admiration reached the convent regularly, and local musicians drew inspiration from her example. Yet for her, the most important reward was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her heart had been expressed fully, that her music had reached beyond the confines of her life, and that she had touched the world in a meaningful, lasting way. She played the piano each day, not out of necessity or obligation, but from pure love, joy, and a sense of connection that transcended the ordinary. The nun understood, more clearly than ever, that life's limitations were often self-imposed or externally dictated, but the spirit could soar beyond any boundary. Her courage, creativity, and devotion had turned a private passion into a public blessing, inspiring countless people in ways that could not be measured. Music had been her companion, her voice, and her bridge to the world, and she had finally allowed it to shine as brightly as it was meant to. In the stillness of the convent, as the sun set and shadows stretched across the floors, she played once more, each note a testament to a life lived fully, authentically, and courageously. And in that music, the world, both near and far, found inspiration, solace, and a reminder of the extraordinary power of the human heart. The days that followed the extraordinary performance were filled with quiet reflection and gentle acknowledgement. The nun returned to her routine, tending the gardens, assisting with meals, and walking the halls with the same calm presence that had always defined her. Yet there was a change within her, a lightness, a subtle strength, and a profound sense of fulfillment. The music had become more than a private sanctuary. It was a bridge to the hearts of others, a shared experience that lingered long after the last note faded. She found herself thinking often about those who had heard her play, about the children who had dreamt of meeting her, the visitors who had come seeking a moment of inspiration, and the nuns who had silently witnessed the depth of her talent. Each memory brought a gentle warmth to her heart, a reminder that the courage to act, to follow one's passion despite obstacles, had ripple effects far beyond what she could see. Her life, long dedicated to quiet service, had suddenly become a source of hope and inspiration for many. Letters and messages began arriving regularly, each one a testament to the power of her music and the story of her courage. Some were simple notes of thanks, describing how her story had encouraged someone to pick up an instrument or follow a dream. Others were more detailed, recounting the ways her music had inspired changes in perspective, decisions, or even life paths. The nun received each message with humility, touched by the connections forged through her music. She did not seek recognition or fame. The acknowledgement of impact was enough to fill her heart with quiet joy. Within the convent, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Leaders and fellow nuns began to recognize the importance of nurturing individual talents alongside daily responsibilities. Music, once a private indulgence, became a more open part of life within the walls. Practice sessions were encouraged, and small performances within the community were allowed, providing opportunities for expression and connection. The nun watched these changes unfold with gentle satisfaction, understanding that her courage had helped pave the way for a more supportive and inspiring environment. Despite the attention and admiration, she remained grounded. She understood that the music itself was the true gift, and her focus remained on the act of playing, the joy it brought, and the connections it fostered. She spent hours at the piano each day, experimenting with new melodies, improvising, and revisiting pieces from her past. Each note carried intention and emotion, reflecting her experiences, her reflections, and the deep sense of peace she had cultivated over the years. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a companion, a confidant, and a living expression of her spirit. She began to consider the future, imagining ways to continue sharing her music while maintaining the humility and discipline that had always guided her life. Small gatherings, private lessons, and occasional performances within safe and respectful settings became possibilities she explored carefully. She recognized the responsibility that came with her talent, the importance of inspiring without overwhelming, of sharing without seeking accolades. Each choice was guided by thoughtfulness, compassion, and a desire to touch hearts meaningfully. The broader community continued to celebrate her story, sharing it through word of mouth, letters, and small articles in local newspapers. People spoke of the elderly nun who had played with such passion and skill that it left everyone in awe. Her courage became a symbol, inspiring others to pursue their passions regardless of age, circumstance, or expectation. Parents shared her story with their children, teachers spoke of her example in classrooms, and musicians reflected on the importance of authenticity and dedication. Her life had become a quiet beacon, demonstrating the transformative power of talent, perseverance, and courage. In her private moments, she reflected on the journey that had led to this point. From her early days at the piano, through years of disciplined routine and secret practice, to the moment she finally played for an audience, every step had been meaningful. She understood that patience, resilience, and quiet determination were as important as talent itself. The obstacles she had faced were not setbacks but opportunities for growth, shaping her character and deepening her appreciation for the gifts she possessed. Music had been both a companion and a teacher, revealing truths about life, courage, and the human spirit. She continued to interact with visitors, offering gentle performances and sharing insights about music and expression. Each encounter was treated with care, ensuring that the experience remained personal and authentic. She discovered that even brief interactions could leave lasting impressions, providing encouragement, solace, or inspiration to those who listened. The impact of her music extended far beyond the notes themselves, reaching into the hearts and minds of all who experienced it. As time went on, the story of her performance grew into a legend within the local community and beyond. People spoke not only of the skill with which she played but of the courage it took to step forward, to embrace her passion despite restrictions, and to share it with the world. The tale became a source of hope, a reminder that life's obstacles could be overcome, that age was not a limitation, and that the heart's voice, when nurtured and expressed, could leave an enduring mark. The nun herself remained humble, focusing on daily life, service, and the joy of music. She understood that her greatest reward was not recognition, but the quiet knowledge that her actions had touched lives, inspired others, and demonstrated the power of authenticity. Her performances were now intentional, thoughtful, and measured, ensuring that the music remained a source of connection rather than spectacle. She played not for fame but for the pure joy of expression, the fulfillment of sharing a gift that had been cultivated over decades. In quiet moments, she would sit by the window, reflecting on the journey and the ripple effects of her courage. She considered the lives she had touched, the inspiration she had sparked, and the subtle changes that had begun within the convent itself. She felt gratitude for the opportunity to express herself, for the support she had received, and for the knowledge that her music would continue to resonate long after the final note. The piano had become a vessel for legacy, a means of connecting generations, and a source of lasting joy and fulfillment. Her story inspired more than just musicians. People from all walks of life found encouragement in her example. The elderly who thought they had missed their chance, the young who struggled to find confidence, and those facing obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Her life became a testament to the idea that courage, dedication, and the willingness to act upon one's passions could create extraordinary outcomes. The impact of her performance extended far beyond the music itself, touching the very essence of what it means to follow one's heart. Even as her fame, however quiet and local, grew, she remained true to herself and her values. The joy of creation, the power of music to connect hearts, and the satisfaction of knowing that she had acted courageously were enough to sustain her. She continued to dedicate herself to daily routines, service, and reflection, while allowing her music to be a living, breathing presence in the lives of those who encountered it. Her legacy was not built on accolades but on the quiet, profound influence of talent, courage, and authenticity. As she played each day, the melodies became richer, infused with the experiences of her life, the lessons she had learned, and the emotions she had carried. The music was at once personal and universal, a reflection of her journey and a gift to anyone who heard it. She understood that the true value of her talent lay not in public recognition but in the ability to inspire, to comfort, and to remind others of the extraordinary potential within every individual. In the evenings, as the convent grew quiet and the world outside settled into calm, she would sit at the piano and let her heart speak freely. Each note was a message of hope, courage, and connection, a reminder that age, circumstance, or limitations could never fully restrain the spirit. The music became a narrative of resilience, creativity, and love, and it continued to reach far beyond the convent walls, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. She knew that her story would endure, that the music would live on in the hearts of those who had experienced it, and that the example of courage and authenticity would inspire future generations. Her life had been dedicated to service, discipline, and devotion, but through the piano, she had also created a legacy of inspiration and hope. The music, once a private sanctuary, had become a shared blessing, a source of joy, and a testament to the power of following one's heart. As she reflected on all that had occurred, she felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. The obstacles she had faced, the patience she had cultivated, and the courage she had embraced all contributed to a life rich in meaning and purpose. The music, which had always been a companion, had now become a bridge to the world, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who heard it. She understood that true greatness was not measured by fame or recognition, but by the impact one has on the hearts and lives of others. In her final moments of reflection each day, she allowed herself a gentle smile, knowing that she had lived fully, authentically, and courageously. The piano remained a constant presence, a reminder of the journey, the victories, and the quiet power of the human spirit. Through her music, her courage, and her dedication, she had inspired countless people, created meaningful connections, and left a legacy that would endure far beyond her own lifetime. And in that understanding, she found a joy and peace that would remain with her always, a melody that would never fade.